All right, good afternoon. My name is Tim Sexton. I'm the Associate Vice President for Public Affairs here at the University of Notre Dame, and very humbled to be here with you today, especially standing in front of this group of panelists. We are going to talk about the economic engine and the relationship between the city of South Bend and the University of Notre Dame, and this is a stellar group to be able to have this conversation. I have a number of questions that I have prepared to ask this group to just get the ball rolling here. But for this to really be a successful session, we need questions from you as well. And so at a point here, latter part of the program, I'm going to turn it to you guys. So as they're talking, if you want to jot something down or make note of it, that would be great. I think that this is a group that would be more than happy to address your questions, okay? Again, my name is Tim Sexton. I was born and raised here in South Bend, Indiana. Went to school at Notre Dame twice. And I've been a part of Notre Dame for about 8 years now. Prior to coming to work at Notre Dame, I worked at St. Joseph's Regional Medical Center for about 20 years and was there during their transition to their new hospital. Absolutely love, as you can imagine, working for the University of Notre Dame and feel blessed to be able to come to campus on a daily basis.
Was your dad by any chance?
Yes. My dad was Bill Sexton, yes.
I had a class. He's originally from Columbus, Ohio.
Correct.
And then Ohio State, and then here, and I'm from Columbus.
Wonderful. Let's connect after this. I'd love to talk with you. Awesome. Now, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves here briefly. They each have a microphone to speak into. But Rich, I'm going to start with Rich Carlton.
My name is Rich Carlton. I'm the president of an organization called Data Realty here in town. Under our corporate family of companies, we have a data center business, and we also have a big data and analytics data science business, which we'll probably talk about later. I am a product of the local scene as well from here. While I didn't go to Notre Dame, I went to Indiana University, but my mother was a secretary here for decades and at the library and then at the legal aid clinic, and because of her length of time with Notre Dame, I was kind of on the Notre Dame scholarship program my last year at Indiana through some of the things from the university as well.
Yep. Bryan Ritchie, our new Vice President of Innovation.
All right, I'm done. No, that's about all I was going to say. I'm the Associate Provost and Vice President for Innovation here at Notre Dame. I'm responsible for the Idea Center, and we'll talk a little bit about how that all brings all of those things under one umbrella here in a second.
Great.
Pete Buttigieg, I'm in my 6th year as mayor here in South Bend, and my folks, actually my father just retired a few weeks ago from the faculty, so you could say I'm here because of Notre Dame.
Hi everybody, I'm Regina M Burton. I'm born and raised here in the South Bend region as well. I run an organization called Michiana Partnership, and we focus on regional economic development. So branching out beyond South Bend to the 47 connected communities, and we cover 5 counties, and we're really focused on marketing and attraction, recruiting businesses here, but a lot of that is working with the university. And when I was a kid growing up here, I'm maybe the only one that didn't have any connection with Notre Dame at all. I mean, I can't even remember coming to campus. We grew up way in Mishawaka, 5 minutes away. So
Way out of the way.
way over there. So it's, kind of one of my personal missions to make sure that our community feels connected to the university and to sort of draw out some of the innovation and the culture and the vibrancy that happens here on campus to, those who can access it from maybe an hour's drive away.
So I was right? This is a stellar group to have in front of you today, and we appreciate them being here. Mayor, I'm going to actually direct the first question to you. You referenced you're in your 6th year as mayor here in South Bend. During your time, how have you seen the transition and just the collaboration between the university and the city of South Bend?
Yeah, one of many reasons I love my timing is that I think the relationship with the university is at an all-time high right now. And first of all, this is a city that really has taken about 50 years to figure out what it's doing if we're not a company town for Studebaker. And there was a very long hangover from that economic blow that we took in the early 60s, but it's finally run its course. And, when we started running in 2011, our message was that, nothing like Studebaker is going to come back, but that's okay, and here's why. And a lot of that had to do with areas where we could grow, like advanced manufacturing. A lot of it had to do with the emergence of whole new industries that didn't even exist when the last Studebaker rolled off the line, like some of the work that Rich and his colleagues are doing. And part of it's had to do with the university, I think, really embracing its leadership role in the community. We're fortunate that I think we're not one of those towns you read about where there were sort of hostilities that had to be addressed between the community and the university. We were one where there were kind of just separate things. Everybody was doing their thing in the city and doing their thing at the university, and the two never really connected very much. And especially for previous generations of alumni. If you spend any time, just a couple hours ago, I was on the southeast side of town, close to an environmentally impaired creek that's being remediated with help from engineering students at the university and anthropology students who are doing ethnography, working with the low-income residents of the neighborhoods as they decide how this remediation project could lead to a new future for that part of town. So it's just one of many, many examples, in addition to a lot of the initiatives that Tim has been leading or working on, and faculty members, the administration. We can't even keep track of them all sometimes, and that's a good thing. It means that at the student level as well as the faculty level, not to mention the administration level, we have a ton of collaborations, and I'm envisioning a lot more where that came from.
One of the things that Mayor Pete has been very generous with is his time. He's on our campus quite a bit, not only interacting with our administrators and leaders, but also with our students. In fact, you, I believe, had coffee one evening with one of our women's dorms here on campus that won the, I think it was the Environmental Friendliness
Yeah,
Award.
I think they won me as a prize.
Yeah, they won Mayor Pete as a prize. Yes, they did. Bryan, hearing the mayor talk about just this transition going on, and you being relatively new into your role, and I'm going to say very new into your role, how do you see that in your role you can build upon that?
Well, I have to be honest and say I wouldn't have taken this role had there not been these kinds of things going on in South Bend. And I think if we really understand what's happened at the university, I mean, it's one thing for a very good undergraduate university to not connect to the city it's in. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be true, especially for a university like Notre Dame that's not a state school. It's drawing people in from all over the world, and they come get an education and then leave. But the transformation at Notre Dame from that to a world-class Tier 1 research university changes the name of that game dramatically, because now our success is more closely tied with South Bend's success. We can't attract the right folks to come in here and do the research if their spouses and partners can't find a job in South Bend, because what else are they going to do? And you might say, well, they could commute to Chicago, but have you done that a couple of times? Because after you've done that a couple of times, you just want to shoot yourself, right? I just did it yesterday. It's brutal. I mean, 90 miles feels like 400. I mean, yeah, it's tough. Now, there are game changers there too, right? And technologies, you know, the South Shore double tracking, other things like that will change that game. But for us to hear what they are interested in doing and to see what Rich is doing and his colleagues and others around taking advantage of this new industry, which gives us a place to land new companies that we're creating, gives us a chance to create an ecosystem or at least participate in helping to create an ecosystem that attracts people here and keeps people here. Now you've got a different game for the students as well. It's not just about coming here and getting an education. It's coming here and doing hands-on projects, right? I mean, it's creating companies. It's sticking around in this spot. It's building up something that might look like, you know, an Austin or a Provo or a Boulder or something like that down the road. That's interesting, and that's an interesting opportunity.
Thanks, Bryan. The South Shore just came up in conversation, and Regina, I'm going to look down at you if you wouldn't mind. Regina actually was with a panel of folks meeting with our South Bend Tribune earlier this week to talk about some of the modifications, some of the changes that we're hoping to see happen. I'm going to ask you, Regina, if you wouldn't mind updating the group on that.
Right, just a quick update. Our goal or our tagline is 90 by 2020. So right now the Amtrak does offer convenient service, and of course you can drive, but when you reduce the train travel to Chicago to a time that's similar to being able to drive there, it's a game changer.
It is.
You know, so it's a $290 million project, and that sounds overwhelming, but the partners that are working together, and you'll hear me talk a lot about collaboration today, but the federal government's involved, the state government's involved, the city, the county, the 3 counties between us and Chicago, all investing to make that happen by some double tracking work. And then if any of you have taken the train back and forth from Chicago to the airport, relocating the station from the east side to the west side of the terminal, which in itself shaves about 10 minutes off of the time. And so it's really exciting. There's a ton of interest in this, and we think that connectivity to one of the world's largest economies is a game changer for us.
I have to compliment the elected officials, Mayor Pete, of course, being one. The city is embracing some of the charges that would be there, and our county is as well. And as Regina said, this is something that the community is very, very excited about. Rich, I'm going to segue over to you. Your company started over, your offices were in Innovation Park, And now, as Pete mentioned, you're down at Ignition Park. Can you talk to the group a little bit about your organization, a little bit more in detail and how that transition occurred?
And this may be a little longer answer, but we feel very, very, very blessed to be, in some ways, the poster child for some things that were ideas 6, 7 years ago, what could happen possibly if we had the right alignment, and we're an example of what's been able to benefit from that. So the long story version is my business partner and you heard I'm from here. My business partner is from the south side of Chicago and was fortunate enough to come here and play football for Coach Holtz in the late 90s. And he got into an entrepreneurial business early on with a little venture dollars from his college roommate who had just come into a few bucks, a guy named Jerome Bettis, who loaned him some dollars to start a technology-based business, and that led to a relationship with Jay Jordan and Jordan Hall of Science, and we had a data center business that we had multiple locations that we had sold about 10 years ago, and we were looking to, we worked for that larger company for a period of time, but as Pete was talking about, and Bryan and Regina, there was this transformation that was going on campus with a much more direct interest in research and what can we do to things to have all this immense talent that we have that comes into our region actually benefit on both sides. And so, and as Tim said, the relationship previous to that was the city would kind of come in 6, 7 weekends a year and root for the Irish, and the students might come off campus. Maybe a few of you visited Corby's in your day, here in town, but there wasn't a lot of internships, connections, businesses, or other opportunities. And so when we decided to get into the data space, which we saw this big data and the world that was changing of what you could do with data, and we'd been in that space a little bit before, we saw that the limiting factors were going to be investments in the technology and infrastructure you were going to need to really do it, and the talent that was going to be necessary. Well, we had both those things here if we just made the right investments. And so, as Tim said, our business plan, we wrote at Innovation Park while they were building the walls around us for the first building. Hopefully you'll get a chance to go see the second one there. From there, we started soliciting investors who might help with this vision of where it could go, and the university's commitment was beyond just what you would normally expect. The fact the university is an investor in our business, and John Affleck Graves sits on my board. And so we built a data center in the south side of town in a place that was a dream called Ignition Park. Ignition Park, when we announced it, was a collection of old, empty Studebaker buildings that had been there for 50 years. And at our data center now, we have the board from that press conference, because at that point in time, we had to tell people where it might be going. And those buildings came down, but what they left behind them was an unbelievable world-class power infrastructure that used to power automotives that now power a world-class data center that was designed by the same people that did Google's and Facebook's and others. And because of that, we've been able to attract the second largest law firm in the world. It stores all of their data here in South Bend, and we connect to 14 countries that come in. We have multiple multinational organizations. But then it was, what can we do with this data? And there was a wonderful professor on campus named Dr. Nitesh Chawla who was churning out PhDs that were going to work for Amazon and Google and the like. And Nitesh had a real vision for how data science was going to go and how you could take those disparate data points and turning it into meaningful business applications. And so collectively, we formed an organization called Analytics that now employs about 50 people. That's led by 2 former PhDs from Notre Dame. We have multiple people with master's degrees. We have a triple domer, but now it's expanded. We've been able to attract, we just hired a PhD from Carnegie Mellon. We've got a person with a master's degree from MIT and others that are relocating to South Bend. We got students that are living here. We had 15 interns start this week. And they're doing things that are unbelievable as it relates to predictive analytics. And if you go to Best Buy this week and you look at buying a new washer and dryer from Whirlpool, you can buy a connected appliance. It sends 8 signals a second from everywhere in the country that comes right back here to South Bend. And we combine that with other data where we're helping them reduce machine failures and predict what type of parts are going to fail, when they're going to fail, so you can have a one-call repair and really have a great consumer experience. And all of that is happening because of a vision of connection between the university, ideas that could be formed here. You can attract talent. We are saying that people that, we have wonderful, wonderful talent that comes in that are saying, wow, this is a great place to be. We have talent that's left the area that is now coming back. And there's some real momentum to where when you combine that, if you drive by Ignition Park and you see there, and then you see the Notre Dame turbine engine facility that could have gone on campus, instead was chosen to put into the community, that they've got about 60 employees that are PhDs. This week they had a conference on our campus site that had people in aerospace from around the country that were right here in South Bend that are thinking about big things. And so you've got a collective campus now that's sat empty for 50 years, as the mayor was saying, that I would be hard-pressed when you looked at the number of PhDs, master's degrees working in really high advanced technology. I don't think there's any place with that level of concentration in the northern half of the state of Indiana for sure. And it's one of the largest ones, I would think, in the Midwest of advanced degrees working on things. And I feel like we're just in our infancy of what's going to happen in that part of the region.
Rich talked about individuals coming to this area, living in this area. there's a great amount of activity right now in the downtown area relative to condominiums, apartments, and things. Mayor, can you speak to some of that transition? And if you would, also, we just went through about 18 months of construction downtown. Some of you might not have been down there yet, but the Smart Street Initiative is what it was labeled, and actually, I love it. I was asked about this last night. I love the transition, but if you'd speak to what you did downtown and how that was changed, that would be great.
Sure. So if you haven't had a chance to see downtown for yourself recently, I strongly encourage you to do it. You might not recognize the downtown that South Bend had 20 or even 10 or even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
A few things are happening. One is that in cities generally, and you see this in the bigger cities, that people are more interested in working and living and socializing in the heart of the city. There was some question over whether that would apply to small communities like ours. We're about 100,000 people. But the jury is in, and the answer is yes. What we're seeing is that there are a lot of people who are choosing to live downtown. And it's interestingly not just people who are from the younger generation. Actually, a lot of folks my parents' age who find that kids are out of the house and they no longer feel like looking after a big yard. And so there's this great confluence of the two largest generations in American history, boomers and millennials, both expressing a renewed interest in living within walking distance of places where they can work or eat or drink or socialize. And you can literally see it around you when you go to downtown South Bend. This year alone, we have about 300 new residential units coming online. And a lot of it's retrofits of old office buildings. Some of it's new building too. When a set of row houses were built around 2010 or 11, 6 of them went up. It was the first new home construction in 30 years. Now we have project after project coming through. And it really shows that there's an interest in that kind of living. What we realized as a city is that design can help or hurt that kind of growth. And actually the prototype for the kind of mixed-use development we're promoting downtown is right across the street here where you see Eddy Street Commons, where my predecessor partnered with the university to make sure that there was an authentically mixed use of land where you got folks living and working upstairs and you got shops and restaurants downstairs. Something you ordinarily have organically in the heart of a city, but we're actually having to come back to that. Now the other thing we've done, probably the most unpopular thing I've done on purpose, is reconfigure the downtown streetscape. Up until recently we had a 4-lane, one-way highway pair blasting you through downtown, and the primary function of that was to evacuate downtown. Our goal is to repopulate downtown. We want you to stay there, right? And why would you sit and have a cup of coffee or take a walk on a sidewalk when you feel like you're next to a highway? And so we decided that we would do what's called a road diet, narrow the road, convert it to two-way traffic, and basically slow down the cars a little bit, reclaim some sidewalk, and use that to help create a street life that will be conducive to business. We've already seen over $60 million in private investment coming from investors who are building or fixing buildings, telling us that that's been motivated partly by our Smart Streets project. But people are grumpy about it because it's slowing them down. We had a good laugh recently with Eric Garcetti, a friend of mine who's the mayor of Los Angeles, because I told him people were furious with me because we were increasing by the commute to get from one city limit to the other city limit by as much as 3 minutes. But when you live in a city where you can traverse the entire central business district in a car in 4 minutes or less, we think you can afford adding that 10 or 20% in order to make sure we have a richer street life. And we just took the bandages off, so to speak, really in the last few days. And we've got bike lanes, street trees, lights, and a lot of things to just make it a more inviting urban environment. And we think that'll be a shot in the arm for the next round of downtown redevelopment and investment. So we're very excited about what it's going to yield.
I'm sure an invitation from the mayor, while you're here, to swing down. It has gone through a major transformation, and it's fantastic. It's much more pedestrian friendly. Bryan, when we go back to the Idea Center, again, there's construction going on right across the street. Can you tell us about where things are at with the construction phase? Are things on time? Yeah. First off, and then secondly, would you talk just a little bit about if you were to look 5 years, 3 years out, what's success look like for you for the Idea Center?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, I don't know about you, but I listen to these two guys, I get pretty excited. I mean, it's really great. If you've driven past the Innovation Park, you'll see that the second building is almost finished. It's due to be completed really end of December, up and operational the 1st of January. it's pretty much already spoken for in terms of residency of getting filled. So there's a plan that we'll build 5 buildings on that site, and we hope to do that over the next 5 years, so, and fill those. And we're really looking for companies that are just interested in connecting back to Notre Dame. If you're high technology, high energy, you want to be part of that ecosystem and connect with the faculty, the students, the community, then that's a great spot for you there. Now, I will put it in perspective. Purdue has 20 buildings each on 5 sites, so we've got some building to do to catch up. But,
How long have they been at it?
yeah, they've been at it
They've
for
been
a
at
while.
it for a while,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. But we'll get there. And so the Idea Center itself, I mean, I'm really excited about what the university is doing. And I just one really, you look out 5 years in terms of this vision, and you know, all you have to do is look back 5 years and realize what we weren't doing to look forward to see the opportunity. And interestingly enough, Notre Dame is positioned to do something that I think no other university has done. And I really mean that. I've done this in a number of places and seen it done in a number of places. And this includes Stanford and MIT, which happen to be in some great ecosystems, and their stuff gets, you know, done in a nice way because of where they are. We're going to have to do something a little more disciplined and a little more rigorous in the processes that we create. But you know, next year our goal is to create 16 companies. So you can think about, when I was at Utah, we did 162 companies over 5 years. And that changes the game. It changes the landscape. It changes what comes. And a lot of times people will say, oh, we don't have the people, we don't have the money. But my experience is that people and money are fungible assets and resources, and they follow the value. And so wherever you can create value, the people and the money come. And what we found is that over time, you start to create this virtuous cycle. And you start to draw in people who then say, wow, there's cool things going on in the city, and there are great companies to work for, and there's a university that's connected, and it's putting out all of these opportunities. This is someplace I'd like to land and become a part of. And you start to see things happening that you're not driving, that something else is driving. I mean, I heard a really interesting stat just the other day where I came from in Utah now, 5 of the 10 top private companies worth $1 billion or more are located in Provo, Utah. Qualtrics, Domo, Inside Sales, go down the list. It's really amazing what's gone on in just the last 5 years, what's happened there in terms of this virtuous cycle. There is no reason that doesn't happen here. We have a university that has all the resources, it has all of the desire and will, it's connected to a great city, it's connected to great companies. There's no reason that 5 years out down the road we don't look and say, this has been dramatically transformed, and people don't look and say, wow, there's the Austin of the Midwest, or there's the, you know, Provo of the East, or whatever. This could be that place. I really believe that.
Bryan, when you look at where the second building's being built, that looks like there's room there for additional buildings should we need
3
them?
more. So whoever wants to donate to make that happen, we're ready to.
All right. We've been talking a lot about South Bend and the connection with the university, but it's gone beyond that into the regional area. Regina, can you talk about that transformation, because that's been recent?
It has, I think, similar to the university and the city's independent operations historically and how they've come together. We're also seeing that with the adjacent counties and cities here across the region. We've got all types of people. You know, we have Democrats and Republicans, and we have elected officials, and we have, you know, our general public, and we've got academic and philanthropic, all of these differing points of view, and it hasn't always been aligned, working toward a common goal. We're getting there, and we're further along than we ever have been, and a lot of it came about a couple of years ago. The state of Indiana kind of recognized what's the biggest threat to economic development across our state, definitely including regions like ours, and it was population stagnation. And so they put together a program where they offered a couple of $42 million grants that they were going to award to regions who are working well together and had a vision to provide the quality of life amenities that would attract the millennials and other generations back here to Indiana, in our case here to the South Bend-Elkhart region. And so I'll say $42 million definitely is a good incentive for people to work together. But I'm going to guess a lot of people thought that this wasn't the kind of region where you just had too many different kinds of people to come together. And it happened. So we spent about a year where we had over 2,000 people coming together across the geography, but not only across the geography, across the sector. So industry leaders, elected officials, the academic sector, economic development professionals, and the general public, and kind of figured out what are the gaps that we're missing here. Why don't people want to live here? So if it's a great university, and we in fact have a lot of great colleges in the area, over 40,000 students are going to school when you look at the region as a whole, but why aren't they staying here? So, and we have great companies you're starting to work for. So that's all really important fundamentals with economic development, industry growth, startup business, and the ecosystem there. But we wanted to look at the vibrancy and the quality of life. We put together a great plan, and our plan focused on the assets. So if you look at an innovation district, it has an anchor institution like the University of Notre Dame, and it has a strong manufacturing or business sector like we have, especially in our adjacent Elkhart County. So we're combining those assets together, and when we bring the jobs and people have a high quality job here, we also want to be able to make it a choice for them to live here and for their family to want to live here. So we invested that $42 million. We won one of the grants. It leveraged an even greater amount of private capital, and our local public sector put in funds as a match to the state dollars. So over $210 million of investment is happening right now through 18 projects that we've selected, and they're all about the urban cores. So when you're talking about the multifamily housing and the mixed-use developments and the smart streets, and we've got the river lights and public art, and we've got sports centers and natatoriums going up, and this is all because we came together as a region and collaborated and had a common vision that if we are going to be strong, if we are going to be a well-known branded place that's nationally recognized that people want to move to, it has to be vibrant, it has to have those amenities. And so that's been our focus over the last year, and now we're into the construction process and actually starting to fund those projects and the developers that are moving forward. One of them being the Studebaker. I think, that's kind of an interesting. Rich was talking about where they're located on the former Studebaker campus. We're putting a small $3.5 million investment in through this Regional Development Authority to a project that will re-skin and create a new facade on this, million square foot
Monstrous,
building
yes.
that it's just been looming over downtown South Bend for 50 years since Studebaker closed. So the 300,000 people a year that go to Four Winds Field to watch a baseball game are looking up at a vacant, abandoned building where the windows are falling out. It doesn't make you feel proud. It's not the kind of place you think, oh, I want to invest here. And that's going to be completely redone, and eventually will be one of the largest tech campuses in the Midwest. So, we're really excited about what's happening. It's a lot of work, and it would only be done if people were working together and that collaboration was happening.
I could speak from being in the audience. Two of the panelists, Mayor and Regina, were on the team that represented our region in making the case downstate to the governor and the panel that had been established to review the different regions. And I believe there were 7 regions that actually had applied for the money. The fact that Mayor Pete, John Affleck-Grays was one of the presenters, Pete McGowan, Regina, and then we had John DeSalle, I believe, from Plymouth as part of it. They finished, and literally it was immediate. You could just tell from the expressions of the people that were going to be voting on this. They were blown away of the partnership and collaboration that was articulated. Thanks, Regina. Rich, Bryan talked about jobs and the creation of jobs and this momentum that comes from opportunities being developed. From your perspective, you referenced you just hired a PhD from Carnegie Mellon. Mm-hmm. Are people calling you? Are they wanting to be a part of this community and be a part of what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully if you're getting anything out of date, we're just 4 members. I think you could pick a lot of members of our community right now that hopefully what you would hear is a unified vision of excitement. And it used to be where there was a lot of reasons talked about in town of why we couldn't do something. And as Bryan is saying now, we talk collectively about why we can do something. And one of the most interesting transformations for me has been the view of our younger employees, and at 47, I'm an old guy in our company. I mean, no, I mean, it is, when you're dealing in the type of work that we do, I realized I was the old guy when we did the co-ed softball team, and they said, hey, you can pitch. And I was like, well, that's where they put the old guy. Yeah, and then it kind of hit me. But the younger folks that we have here, a couple years ago used to ask me often, well, why do people who live here say bad things about here? Boy, this is great. You got this going and this going and this going. And now I don't hear those bad things anymore from our own community, let alone the people that are here. What they're seeing, it just came out recently where in one of the talks, it was when we had the commercialization dinner, about when you factor in university ranking compared with cost of living, this is the #1 mix of anywhere in the country. And so you've got really high talent that can live a wonderful life. And so now what we're seeing is that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where a few years ago when we were trying to get the company going, and we're really begging those first people to kind of stay, and the first 3 or 4 that stayed and helped us found Analytics were because they had a relationship with Nitesh and the professor at Notre Dame who said, hey, we're going to try something cool. And I honestly think for most of them it was, well, I'll give this a year, it'll look good on my resume. The one who was the triple donor, got his PhD under Nitesh, lead data scientist, he's now married, bought a house here in town. The other PhD just bought a house in Granger. But what we're seeing is, I mean, we had a lot to, where we used to be begging before, the 15 interns that I talked about. I mean, we had massive amounts of applications for that. They're hearing about it, they're excited about it, they think that, wow, there's some really cool work going on in South Bend. And the view of students here of saying, boy, I could continue to live here, I can continue to enjoy the things that I've enjoyed about college and really build a substantial career here, is definitely changed. Definitely changed. I mean, we now have, well, I mentioned our little bit of interns. It used to be, and this is where we talked about just the differences. I spent 20 years of my career here never thinking about having an intern from Notre Dame. I'll be honest with you. And it was everybody's fault. It was our fault because we said, oh, those students don't want to stay here. And the students didn't want to stay here because the community didn't give them any reason to stay here. So when you look now, we now have so many interns going on in our community, not just from Notre Dame, but as all the different colleges and universities that we have. But what we've ended up doing, our Chamber of Commerce for our region, the #1 group right now, we formed a young professionals network for 22 to 40-year-olds that every event they have is 200-300 people, and it sells out. And they've branded themselves now as YPNers, where they end up doing social events. And hey, the YPNers are going bowling or they're doing this. And we've pushed that down into our internship program, where now it's not just about being a small company who maybe can only take on one intern, and you have this young person saying, well, is there anybody else like me in South Bend? But we now have, through our chamber, an internship program that supplements the existing company programs. Yesterday, got all of our interns from the region together, from the various companies, and they get exposed to the other things that are going on in our community and why this is a great place to live, and they see a lot of other people like themselves. They may be the only accounting intern for ABC Corporation, but they find out that there's a whole lot of others just like them in our community, that there's some scale building now that we're seeing as well.
And I believe, Mayor Pete, your intern is, where'd she go? Did she step out? There she is, waving in the back. She's a Harvard student right now and is interning in the mayor's office. We're glad you're here. Mayor, we talk about it. You
It's the Notre
referenced
Dame of the East.
the Notre Dame. Said from a Harvard grad. Yes, that's great. We talked a little bit about Eddy Street Commons, and the city has played a crucial role in Eddy Street. Phase 2 is going to get underway here in the next couple of months, and it's going to continue to go south down Eddy Street, and we're going to start getting more and closer to the downtown area. What is your vision there? Do you see an opportunity for more connectivity between the downtown area and the university?
Yeah, the opportunity really, I think, has to do with the psychological distance. Where we're sitting right now is a bike ride away from my office in the county city building downtown. But it's always felt further away than it really is. And so much of that, especially as I've had a kind of an education in urban planning and wayfinding and how those things work as a consequence of having this job, so much of it just depends on what's in between 2 points and whether it flows you into, from one area into another. And so the city's been pretty intentional about trying to get the psychological distance to become shorter and a little more in proportion to the geographic distance, which isn't that far. And Eddy Street was a big part of that. So I think the other thing that's happening, of course, is that the prosperity of the downtown area is expanding outward. So the central business district has grown in terms of the areas that you would consider to be lively or to have something going on. There's a sort of East Bank neighborhood, which we're now going to have a major development there on the site of an old power plant that will bring a major grocery store and more residential units. And a lot of things happening in between, from a dog park to the new St. Joe High School, which no longer looks onto the golf course like it did when I was there, but is now on the site of the old St. Joe Hospital where Tim used to work. And now all of those students, those 1,000 or so students, look out the window and cannot forget that they're part of a city because they see a skyline. The future of Eddy Street Commons is going to be part of that, because it brings us that much closer, and we lure the students, frankly, across that invisible boundary into city limits as they go across Angela or Edison, and bring their disposable income with them, which isn't a bad thing either. But more importantly, their imagination, because they begin to really feel like they're part of the life of the city. And so the more we can stitch those things up through subtle touches like signage and marking, and then through major capital-intensive investments like the expansion of Eddy Street Commons, so that you have more shops, more restaurants, more offices, more spaces that are shared, really, I think, knits the heart of the city to what we might call the campus zone, and it's coming together beautifully.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think it is that perception piece. You're at the tail end of Eddy Street Commons right now. It's probably a quarter of a mile to the St. Joe High School.
That's right.
Another quarter mile to the East Bank Village area, restaurants and residential. And boom, you're downtown, right across the river. It is. It's a perceptual component. Bryan, turning to you. You came from Utah, been here for a short bit, and you've been given the area of commercialization is now one of your responsibilities here at Notre Dame. Could you share with the group a little bit of how the commercialization process from campus to the community, how that all works and your role in that?
Sure. You know, whenever you start to move a university toward being a tier 1 research university, you have to think about what do you do with that research. And Notre Dame has always been interested from a mission standpoint about how do we do good in the world. And so what we want to do is take all of those great discoveries and do something interesting with them and have them be useful to people so that they just don't sit in the ivory tower. So commercialization really is the process of de-risking those technologies, a word we use. If you think about it, these discoveries are very early when we get them, and they need to be de-risked across some gap before they have enough value that someone will come in and invest in them or take them out and run them. So the process that we're doing is a de-risking process where we're squeezing out the risk of these creating value and then making them available for investors and entrepreneurs to do something with those. We see ourselves as kind of benevolent executioners. We're the kind of people who will tell you your baby is ugly and why, but then we'll also, if it's the right thing, pile on and help you get where you need to go. And so this is an opportunity for us to, start to create value with the things that we're doing here at the university. And we have a tremendous opportunity to do that. And that iterative cycle, by the way, many universities view that whole process of commercialization as sort of it's almost like a Russian roulette kind of game. It's like, can you get lucky? Really. And lucky in that is a big pharma, small molecule discovery that brings in lots of cash. They manage to that home run, and it's a very difficult process. We're taking the entirely different approach. We're kind of the money ball, small ball kind of approach. We're looking to get hit by a pitch. It's like, just get me on base, however we can, right? And we'll advance the runners. And if we do that, if we replicate that enough times, we'll start to score runs. And we also believe that if we get in the batter's box enough times, we'll crank a few out of the park. But that's not what we're managing to. We're managing to just getting that, getting companies started, getting them into the community, giving places for people to land, giving, reasons for investors to come and put dollars in here, giving reasons for students to stick around and for faculty to do interesting things. We've seen this done. It's being done right down the road. Purdue is doing this at an amazing clip. They're producing 27 to 30 companies a year, and if you've been to West Lafayette lately, you'll see what they're doing there. The same thing is possible here, and even maybe on a bigger scale, because we've got alumni throughout the world and people who are interested throughout the world that Purdue doesn't have. And so we've got some resources to do some really interesting things over time in that space.
That's great. Thank you, Bryan. One of the keys, I think, for us to be successful in our region is our relationship with the state of Indiana. And historically, it wasn't always the best. I think that actually we were so far up north, I think they forgot that we existed at a point in time. That has changed. It has absolutely changed. And so Regina and Mayor, could you comment on that relationship and how you guys work to make sure that Indianapolis doesn't forget about us up here?
I'll just mention a couple of things and then turn it over to you. When we have a theme for our region, we talk about smart, connected communities, and our connectivity to Indianapolis, the state capital, and the commerce that's going on there is important. We talked earlier about Chicago, and that's one major point. But we've invested a ton as a state to make it more accessible. So if you drive down US 31 now, it's much easier to get to Indianapolis physically. And we're working to finish that as a limited access freeway so that it'll be even more accessible. But more importantly than that physical connectivity have been the relationships that have been forged. And I think that there's a great deal of respect by the state for what's been happening up in this region. So we hear that all the time. I was on the phone yesterday with the president of Ivy Tech that has campuses all across the state, and they're just extremely impressed with what's happening right up here. So I think that the more we take the time to spend in Indianapolis and get to know the governor and the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, who's really the one for the state on behalf of us going out across the country and really internationally to be able to recruit people to the state. The more they know what's going on here, the better that we're going to fare as well. So we've felt very connected with them, and there's a ton of leads that have been generated. So it's kind of like when you talk about building the companies here at the university, or if they go out and generate leads, we have to have this ecosystem that's ready then to land them. And they finally see that that's happened. So we've got, buildings and product. We have an entrepreneurial ecosystem that can support startups. We've got mentors. We've got, all of the things that it takes to run a business and locate it there. So I think it's just developed an awareness of what we've got going on up here.
Mayor, anything additional you'd like to add?
Sure, yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, just leadership engagement really mattered. So when I took office, it was kind of like Rich was saying, it was everybody's fault. So it was everybody's fault that Indianapolis and South Bend didn't really talk to each other. And some folks would say it had to do with the fact that this was kind of a more labor-oriented and democratic part of the state. And some people would say that it was, Indianapolis only thinking about what was in its backyard. And I wasn't really sure who to blame, so I just called Mitch Daniels, who was the governor at the time, and said, why don't you come on up and let's see if we can have a good visit and some conversations. Gathered some business leaders together and realized that really there wasn't so much difference when it came to our vision of how growth was going to happen. State leaders know that we're part of Indiana and they want us to grow. And that continued into the Pence administration as well. He and I had a lot of differences of opinion on a lot of things, but we also really went out of our way to work together. And just to give you a sense of the put an exclamation point on some of what Regina was saying. We're not just happy that we got millions of dollars in state grants. That's fantastic. But we really need to understand about how enlightened that program was, this regional cities program, is the structure of it. So what they did was they said, here's this pot of gold, this $42 million, and we're going to give it to a couple of regions. You're all going to compete for it. They didn't even define what a region was. They let us decide what that meant. What they said is this will be available to you to compete for if and only if you can demonstrate that you're working together, which is vitally important as the way economic development is going to work around here going forward. We're only just coming out of the years when the mentality around economic development was, I need to pick off a factory from the next county over so that I look good. And I would, launch some big tax giveaway to make that happen. And meanwhile, the community would be no better off because people would cross county lines to work in these places anyway. And so what we've realized is the communities around us are not our competitors. When there are obscure cities, not even in the top 20 in China with more than 5 million people in them, our competition's not from Elkhart County, it's from overseas. And so we got to demonstrate that we can work together as a region, and that's what the Regional Cities Initiative really led to. We've also got a lot of great leadership in, for example, the Economic Development Corporation that manages state economic development, headed by a Notre Dame grad and South Bend native, Jim Schellinger. That's really helped a lot. And the same is true, for kind of new, I feel like I'm new on the scene, but I'm on my third governor now. We've already spent a lot of time with the current leadership, Governor Holcomb, and somebody else who I think really gets it. But we're always going to have this interesting feature that we are part of the Indiana economy, and we're also increasingly part of the Chicagoland economy. And it's really there that a lot of the alumni relationships with Notre Dame, I think, are going to make a big difference. So the same people that might make their way onto Lou Nani's radar in the development shop because they can write a 5 or 6 figure check are going to be on my radar because they might be making a $10 to $100 million business decision that could affect where something's located and what kind of opportunities exist for the companies they might partner with right here in the South Bend region.
Thanks. I'm going to walk over here because I'm going to surprise him with a question here that he's not anticipating. I could ask this question of Mayor Pete, and he would give you a glowing answer to it. This is addressing a myth, and for those of you, you're going to be fine. Okay. You're going to be fine. This is addressing, in my opinion, a myth, and it's been several years since this came out, but we were actually written about as a dying city at one point in time. It has been a while back. How would you respond to that, Rich?
It was interesting. It was in 2010, right? Late 2010, early 2011. It was just a little blurb in Newsweek as one of the dying cities. And for those that were saying at the time that we can't, boy, that was great for them.
Oh, yes.
I mean, they just picked it up and they wanted to run with it, and on and on and on. And you look now, at where those who, it used to be, I'll be honest with you, there would be a job announcement in our local newspaper online. You know, you'd see it online or you'd see it on our website. And then you'd look at the comments below and they would all be negative. Oh, this will never happen. This won't. These people will never do that. And I can't, there was some benefit or some reason for that over the years. You look now, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen at all because they're seeing it. They're seeing it happen. I mean, when you talk about the downtown, I was with a group that started a restaurant downtown, Le Peep, 15 years ago. And when we started it, you could shoot a shotgun down Michigan Street on Saturday and Sunday and not hit a soul. There was nothing across the street. There was a South Bend Chocolate who closed on Saturday and Sunday at that point in time because there was nobody downtown on the weekend. There really wasn't. And as all of us have said, I challenge you, go downtown tonight. I was calling last night trying to find a table that we could set outside at one of the, nope, they're all gone already. And that's not, while we love it when everybody from out of town comes in, but it's that way a normal Wednesday, Thursday night now. It's hard to find a parking spot downtown. There's music, there's people outside, there's a vibrancy that didn't exist here before. And when we talk about kind of the perfect storm of things going on is that there's alignment between the university and our communities like there has never, you know, I've grown up here, it's never been like this. And I mean alignment between administrations, alignment between community leaders, business leaders. There's positive momentum in every facet of not only our economy, just how we feel and think about each other and how we're doing there. And then you also can't deny, and you know, when we were talking about the political connections here, some of the things that are going on, I mean, you might have seen Mayor Pete ran for chair of the DNC. It gave us wonderful national publicity. I mean, if you might have seen, if you didn't, Mark Zuckerberg came in and drove around with Mayor Pete and visited our town a couple weeks ago. You know, the founder of Facebook, and that's not happening in every community right now. And you know, we also have a political connection right now that's the Vice President of the United States. Who knows? He may be president at some point, depending on how things go. But what you've got is some of the things on the infrastructure bill, you know, that we were talking about here to try and get our railway train.
South Shore.
That's a real benefit to that. So right now you've got some things that just didn't happen before from an alignment of a region, of a university, of a state, and some from a national perspective. And so, you know, I've been saying this is probably my 5th year of saying this, that if South Bend were a stock, I'd be buying. And every year I would still be buying South Bend stock. Our best days are so much ahead of us. It is going to be a very exciting time when Bryan and the initiatives he has really gets rolling, and the work that Regina's done, we've seen so much of it start to pay off, and you can just feel it coming.
All right. All right, we're going to turn it over to you now and have questions of you. I want to make sure people can hear the questions, so let me get to you.
Okay, 2 questions, one from Bryan, one from Mayor Pete. Bryan, as this growth continues to take place and South Bend continues to become a more dynamic city, do you see there being maybe a reach out or a reliance to Notre Dame to maybe provide more resources to the greater community of South Bend, whether it be, for example, continuing education, you know, programs or courses and things like that? And then with Mayor Pete, you know, as this takes place, and you know, I get your Facebook posts, and I just, you know, I just get a marvel at everything that's happening here. But at the same time, there's always, you know, those people who get left behind in any kind of development. Do you feel that your social services are positioned to address the needs of those people who do get left behind or who do struggle in the wake of all this activity?
Actually, I think there's a really interesting connection between your 2 questions, and that is, how do cities and areas transform over time? And if you think about it, you know, we talk a lot, even politically, about, oh, we got to bring these jobs back. When in fact, just if you really look at that's not possible, because the jobs themselves are not the same. I mean, manufacturing today is not what manufacturing was 20 years ago. Ironically, we had a company that it was being formed to help manufacturing companies fill jobs they couldn't fill. I want you to think about that for a second. And we're talking a lot about bringing manufacturing jobs. There are 2 million advanced manufacturing jobs that go unfilled in the United States right now because we don't have the skills to fill them. And so really, if you think about what that means for a university, it means, how do we transform what it is we're teaching our students? I mean, even computer science. You know, computer science, I have sons now who are doing computer science. It's not like computer science I did when I did computer science. It's completely different, right? So the university, in your first question, how does it reach out and connect to the community, and is it going to be relied upon for those resources? And do we also look to bring resources from the city? The answer is absolutely, and it has to collaborate both, I mean, politically, industry, with the academics. The university itself is under a tremendous pressure to transform in the 21st century beyond what it was before. You can't just show up and spend 4 years isolated in a classroom and learn a skill. What a lot of people are saying is you then walk out, you don't have a skill, really. I mean, you got to get connected early and often through internships and work experience and all of these other things in order to know exactly how you're going to apply those things. In fact, in some cases, companies are hiring liberal arts majors to be technology people over time because they think they can shape them better than the computer science department can. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to connect those two things together, and cities need to think about what does that look like for our next generation workforce, and how do we retrain the people who'd never had any of those skills to really function in a very different economy.
Yeah, I think the question is very urgent, especially now because you can tell there's something that's not adding up in our economy, right? We're basically at full employment, and yet we just had an economic anxiety election. That's the kind of thing usually happens in a recession. It happened under full employment or close to full employment. And you see some reflections of that here too. It's my job to cheerlead for all the amazing things happening in our economy. It's also the case that we're a low-income city still, and we have those challenges. So the name of the game really for us is inclusive economic growth, making sure that when there's growth, that everybody's able to get to it. And that's everything from making sure that non-university graduates are connected up to a lot of very promising and well-compensated jobs that are available to non-university graduates with the right training or the right background. And making sure that as a community, we're just geographically distributing the growth. There's a lot of evidence if you take two communities that have the exact same numbers on paper in terms of per capita income, that sort of thing. But one of them is more kind of concentrated and patchy and segregated, and the other one's more integrated throughout. The integrated one's going to have better outcomes in terms of public health, in terms of safety, and in terms of growth, simply as a consequence of the kind of greater civic health that goes on when you have that kind of inclusion. So that's a challenge, and we haven't got it all figured out, but we know that some of the policy tools that are available to us to make sure that when there are new economic opportunities, they happen in different parts of town, to make sure that we're skilling up some people who would otherwise be left out is important. And the other thing that I think Bryan spoke to a moment ago that's very important is we've got to learn to stop thinking about jobs as binary, like either you have a job or you don't have a job. We learned this very early on in economic development because there was this chicken and egg question of how you can grow a city if you don't have the right jobs for people. And what we really found is like just about anybody can get some job. And there are communities so great that you would take any job just so you could live there. Just like there are jobs so great that you'd go to the South Pole in order to do it. There's a spectrum there. But the question around jobs now is what kind of income goes with the job? What kind of dignity goes with the job? And what kind of future does the job have? What kind of certainty goes with the job? And I think as a community that's got a lot of innovative economic growth and a lot of need and a lot of struggle, coupled with a university that is like a lot of the other top 20 universities in terms of its ambition and its level of talent, but unlike most other universities in terms of the sense of purpose and the mission-driven character of a place like Notre Dame, that we have a chance to be the place where talent meets purpose to solve some of those problems.
Great answer. Great question. Yes.
I'd like to ask the mayor, I'm not from this part of the country, back to my 55th reunion, but I'm interested in the kind of partnership that you've developed. What was your background before you decided to run for public office as mayor?
Yeah, so I got out of high school, and the next day I signed. No, I still get carded at bars here. No, mine was mostly business and military. So when I finished grad school, I joined McKinsey. That was when I first realized that I wanted to come home to the Midwest, and so I joined McKinsey, a consulting firm, had a Chicago office, and they were sending me all over the world, and then I realized, if I'm going to pay in order to not live somewhere, I might as well pay South Bend rents and prices instead of Chicago rents and prices. So I got a place close to where I grew up, and then I saw this old house that was vacant and abandoned just around the corner from where my parents lived. And I thought, if I could get to that house before it actually collapses, I could really do something with it. So I got this old house, and right around that time, there was that conversation that Rich was talking about, people kind of wringing their hands saying, what's going on in our city, and what would it take to get it to the next level? And just had one of those moments where I started to realize that if my friends and I weren't part of the solution, then we didn't have any right to be worried about the problem. And I fall back on my business and military training all the time when it comes to doing this job.
Get you right here.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on a wonderful panel presentation to all of you. It's been really inspiring. I'm not a Notre Dame graduate, but I'm married to one, so that's why I'm here. We're from New Jersey, and we actually live in a community that is beginning to do the work here, live here, and entertain here. How, and this is to the mayor and maybe to Regina as well, how do you bring together the residents, the shop owners? I mean, we walk everywhere. We take the train into Manhattan. We buy local. We use local services. But how do we actually come together so that all of our interests are aligned?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, one of the theories of why cities work, the reason that the invention of cities actually predates the invention of agriculture. Humans have always organized ourselves in this way. And one of the reasons that you have so much more intellectual development and patents, for example, per capita in cities than you do as a national average has to do with chance encounters that happen when people just run into each other. The more density you have of everything from coffee shops and groceries to concerts and public events, the more some of those encounters happen that then spark the kind of exchange that leads to growth. And I think that's also true for the kind of civic awakening and the kind of civic pride that a city has to have. And so we've really tried to make sure that we create the kind of spaces. And that may or may not be a government job. Sometimes it certainly is, like something like Parks and Recreation, right, that's up to us. Sometimes you're really relying on private sector, places like La Peep, right, where people are going to bump into each other over breakfast. And making sure you furnish those kinds of events or physical spaces for people to do it. Obviously, there are some virtual spaces where people can do it now, thanks to social media, which for all the issues that go along with it has been a real benefit for somebody like me trying to establish a kind of common vision or a common language around how we talk about and promote the life of our city. And the other thing that really matters is people like you. I call them urban patriots, people who have a kind of almost a patriotism about their city. And they started to emerge here, and it's just a handful of people that you would see that just exuded this kind of belief in the community, and I think they made it okay for other people to feel the same way. And suddenly it became, you know, a little bit cool to care about your city. And so whatever you can do to lift up those voices and let them kind of create, because you can't, sitting in City Hall, think up some of the amazingly creative events and venues that have come about in our city. But when you spot one, you try to figure out how to support it. And finding and then connecting those people to each other just yields multiples in terms of the power of that to rally people around their city.
Rich, did you want to add to that?
One of the things I would say, and I don't know, I don't know how you necessarily build it. I mean, I think back to some of the things that happened, but one of the interesting things is I'm hearing your question and thinking back through, we used to do, every 2 years, our Chamber of Commerce would do a city visit, inner-city visit, and we'd go visit these different locations. And we would come back every year and say, boy, that community, they were all on the same page. We're not like that. We don't have people, and we didn't. And we'd always hoped to be one of those. And honestly, you know, Tim brought up the dying city thing. In hindsight, may have been one of the best things that ever happened to our community, because it was kind of that smack in the face of, wow, we may need to do something here. And there was some of those things happening already, but all of a sudden, it sounds real simple that Pete picked up the phone and called the governor and said, hey, we don't have a great relationship with downstate. What can we do about that? And the university saying, hey, you know, there may be areas where we could lead in economic development, maybe some areas where we can support, maybe we ought to get involved in some things there, and the community doing their part. But it spurred communication between people saying, where do we really want to be? What kind of place do we really want to be? And what is it going to take to get there? And then you start to get into some of that self-fulfilling prophecy where you can start to feel like you're the snowball going down the hill, and then it gets really, really exciting. But sometimes it's just a breaking down of barriers of communication between people who say, where do we really want to live?
Thank you all for your attention. Could you please give a round of applause to our panelists? Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.